The Iowa women punched their ticket into the Sweet 16. But not only that, the path to a Final Four a lot more realistic when this tournament began. Plus, Spencer Lee falls as Iowa finishes second in NCAA wrestling. All coming up today on Locked On Hawkeyes.
Are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every single day. We're available wherever you get podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Lets us know whenever we got a new episode out there for you and lets us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. As we get into it here today, Iowa back in the Sweet 16 in women's basketball. After a hard-fought victory against Georgia, they get it done and pick up the victory 74-66. We'll break that down. Also, a little bit about Spencer Lee and the Iowa wrestling team over the weekend. A second-place finish, some good stories, some disappointing ones, including the loss in the semifinals to Spencer Lee. And just an odd scenario how it played out. Spencer Lee not bouncing back and deciding to medically forfeit his way out of the tournament, finishing in sixth place in his last go through. Some thoughts on that as well coming up today. Spring football right around the corner. Don't worry, we got a lot of football content coming up for you as football begins, and a final pro day also for the Iowa football team. As always, thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Let's get into it here and talk about that Iowa women's team. What a crowd. In fact, that's where I want to start today. That environment inside of Carver Hawkeye Arena with 15,000 fans in attendance, just a jam-packed building, just seeing the good, incredible crowd, the support that this women's program continues to get from the Hawkeye fan base. It is a sight to behold. And yes, you have a generational player. You have a player that in Caitlin Clark will be remembered for a long time, and she is worth the price of admission. She is worth flipping on your television to watch. And as they get ready now to make their way out to Seattle, you know, there's going to be a whole lot of people that are going to do the exact same thing. She is must-watch television. That's what she's become. If you're a sports fan, that's what Caitlin Clark is. And it's incredible that we continue to be at this point on our way after being named to the All-American team, National Player of the Year awards. Those are going to be coming around the corner and on and on and on. This win, maybe more difficult than people envisioned. And you saw the draw come out. And you get the 7-10 over there with Florida State and Georgia. And I was concerned about this Georgia team, not just what they have with Coach Abe over there, a Hawkeye alum. She coming back home, you know that this was going to be extra important to have an opportunity to be coaching her team there. Started her career at Georgia, ended up at the University of Iowa. She was there towards the early 90s is the time that she was there. A couple years later is when Iowa ultimately went to their last Final Four in 1993. And that's another piece here. But kudos to you. That crowd, you know, we hear so many times during men's basketball, you know, that the crowd just isn't very good. But you've been in Carver for wrestling matches and just what that environment can be, what this women's basketball program has been now over the last couple of seasons and the environments that are there. And at times the fan base really willing this team that every time it felt like, boy, Georgia's going to get over the hump. They're going to get back and maybe take the lead. And the crowd just wouldn't let it happen. It was a sight to behold. Credit to everybody out there that was in the building. You absolutely made a difference in this one. Georgia, they're tough. They're gritty. They force turnovers. Iowa in the game, 17 turnovers overall, turns in off of those turnovers into 21 second chance points off turnovers for Georgia in the game. Bulldogs didn't shoot it very well. Iowa did shoot it pretty well for the outside. In fact, in the first half, credit to not what we talk about normally in the Big Two with Caitlin Clark and Monica Zanano. That's not the case. In fact, it was the play of Gabby Marshall, who has just been shooting the crap out of the ball. Starting, and really the only good thing that came off out of that loss to Maryland that they had here about, 3-4 weeks back now, was that she finally started to hit some shots in that game, and it has continued, and she's been red hot ever since. Both her and Warnock in the first half of the game, they're the ones that kept Georgia at bay. You know, Georgia raced out to that early lead. What was it, 15-12 at one point? Iowa responded, 10-0 run. They got the lead back. And then, I mean, the dogfight was on. It was just back and forth. And that Bulldog squad, I was really impressed by the way that they played, the toughness that they had, the tenacity. Now, got out of hand there late in the basketball game as well. And you had some chippiness, you had some hard fouls. And it was not just, there was more than that. It was cheap. It was dirty. There were some dirty plays at the end of the game from the Georgia side. And you hate to see a well played college basketball game end up in that fashion, but ultimately, that's how I saw it. It was not just a heat of the moment kind of things. There was a little bit more to that, and that's disappointing to see from that angle. But the great news is that Iowa gets the win after a year ago that lost to Creighton in the round of 32. Another banged out crowd there at Carver, and the disappointment, the way that that ended in that fashion, had opportunities late in the game and just couldn't make it happen. And that's going to happen. Even at home, there's going to be those kind of moments. And I think that doubt crept into my mind a couple of times in the second half of the game, but they kept responding. Every time Georgia would get up 3 or 4, I would have a little mini run back at them and push it back up to 7 or 8. Really could never get above that during the second half of the game, but it was that kind of matchup. Caitlin Clark, she got it going in the second half. She finishes the game with 22 points, but 12 assists. I think that's when Iowa basketball's at its best, is when Caitlin's out there distributing at that kind of level, when she's at the 10, 11, 12 assist mark. When she is that good, this is when Iowa basketball is at its best. Kate Martin was not great offensively in the game. Know what she can do on the defensive end of the floor. She didn't shoot it real well. Didn't have many opportunities, just 4 shots. Her and that zone defense also that Georgia employed. I really gave Iowa some trouble there. They switched things up a little bit. They got Caitlin into the high post. They did some things with her and get some action and moving the ball into the corners with her in the high post. I thought that was a really good coaching job by Coach Bluter and the staff of making that adjustment going out there. But in a game where you're playing without the sixth player of the year in the Big Ten in Hannah Stuelke, we know what a difference maker she is. We know just how skilled she is around the rim, her ability to beat most girls up the floor, and her speed that she plays at as a post player. She's a different weapon that Iowa just does not have somebody like that with that size and the speed and the agility that she has. She turned her ankle right at the end of practice, it sounded like the other day. Tried to give it a go, wasn't able to. That hurt them. And then he coupled that with Molly Davis going down early, her first time off the bench. She gets rolled up on. She turns her ankle, looked really ugly. You were really concerned about her. She comes back over there. It was good to see, no ice on it, nothing like that, but she was not able to go the rest of the game. So for all intents and purposes, this was a 5-player team. That's what they played with, but were able to get the victory, punch their ticket to the Sweet 16. Now, suddenly that path looks a whole lot better. I didn't believe when the bracket came out that Iowa could make a Final Four. Being honest, I didn't see that being a realistic possibility. Now, Stanford's out. Iowa's got a chance. We'll talk about that path for them. Some wrestling talk as well as we roll through here on a Monday edition. It's the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast is brought to you by Built Bar. The Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now is your time to make it count. Go to builtmarchmadness.com. You can vote for your favorites. Now, we've talked about this before. You know where I'm going. It is the Brownie Batter Puff. That's my favorite. And if you want the Hawkeyes to win, you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or puff. Brownie Batter Puff. Ooh, so good. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entering into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners are going to get a free box of Built. Not only that, one Locked On fan is going to win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built. Built, the best protein bar ever. Seriously, amazing. You won't even think they're good for you. What makes them so good? Well, they're high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. Go right now, builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March. Hop in and support your pick. Trent kind of back with you again here on Locked On Hawkeyes. Thanks for making the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast your first listen every single day. Hey, take a second right now. hit that subscribe button. That's all it takes, just 1 second. Hit that right now. If you're on YouTube, helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. So after Iowa gets the win against Georgia, they're into the Sweet 16. They'll be heading out to Seattle next week and getting ready to await the winner of the matchup coming up this evening, as we will see the matchup between the number 3 seed Duke and the 6 seed Colorado. Saw Duke a year ago. If you remember, they played in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Also remember, though, Iowa was coming off a COVID pause. They're supposed to play a game against Drake. That didn't happen. The team had not practiced together in weeks going into that game. Iowa didn't play well. Caitlin Clark did not play well in that game. You got to remember just what they were going through at that time, the pause that they were going through. I think you're going to see a different team if it is Duke or Colorado, whoever is there in Seattle waiting them. I'd love to see a big crowd out there. Hey, Washington people, Seattle people, stand up, make your way over there to Old Key Arena, and that's where they'll be playing that one. As there'll be 2 regions that'll be out there, along with 2 that'll be played down in South Carolina. So that is the setup this year. A little bit of a change instead of the 4 regional matches. They're going to have 2 of the regions in each of those 2 spots for the Sweet 16 and ultimately for the Elite 8. Now, if it's Duke, it's going to be a tough matchup, but we'll see. We'll talk about that as the week goes on. And after we see that Colorado Duke game, we'll break things down a little bit more and the matchup that the Lady Hawkeyes are going to be facing off against. But before we get into that, the loss to that Stanford sustained on Sunday night to Ole Miss. Ole Miss absolutely grinded them, much like that Georgia team, an SEC team. I mean, they bullied them. They made it tough on them. Stanford so skilled. They had a lot of size on their team. That was a matchup I just didn't like for Iowa, watching the Stanford team this year. Well, they're out. Now, Ole Miss beat them. You wonder about that. And then also in the bracket, awaiting on the bottom side of that, when you look at what is called the Seattle 4 region, that is what it is dubbed. It'll also be the winner of the Texas Louisville game. They'll be waiting and facing Ole Miss in the Sweet 16. So if Iowa does get to an Elite 8, it'll be the winner of Texas and Louisville against Ole Miss, and then the winner of that one will face off in the Elite 8. The path is a lot easier. It just is. And sometimes these are things going to happen 30 years. 30 years. That is how far and how long it has been since Iowa has made a Final Four. And this program and what has developed now over the last, well, I say the last couple of years with Caitlin Clark, but this has been building for a long time. And, they made that first kind of step forward when they got CM Logic. She was a top 10 player nationally, got her out of Wisconsin. She was an incredible player, do everything kind of player on the boards, great passer. She could score. I mean, she could do so many different things. And the program kind of took a step forward at that point in time. We saw them ascending up there. Lisa Bluters had a lot of success. And now what we've seen going back to Megan Gustafson and now here today with the Elite 8 run that they had, still getting over that final hump. It's going to be difficult. It's not to say that it isn't, but this path, it makes me believe a whole lot more. And it wasn't to deride this program or anything like that, but some of those teams, it comes down to matchups, and the matchups I didn't love. Now the path is real, and it's really exciting time for women's basketball. Also, want to talk a little wrestling here before we wrap things up. Spencer Lee falling in the semifinals as he got stuck there. One of the just most crazy instances that I can remember in collegiate wrestling. So it's happening on the semifinal round on Friday night. And flip it on, get ready to go. There's, of course, March Madness going on. There's women's games going on. There's a ton happening at that time. And if you would have told me that Spencer Lee was going to get stuck like that, I couldn't believe it. 53 straight wins. He was wrestling at such a high level. We'll talk about that as we come back here to wrap things up. And just a quick peek at some football here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Well, the tournament is heating up, and now it's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers, you can still get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back into your account if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything: money line, point scores, three-pointers trade. They got you covered there at FanDuel. So already looking at these Sweet 16 matchups coming up in the next round as we get to Thursday in the Sweet 16. Michigan State, they're the only lower seeded team that is favored. They're a slight favorite over Kansas State. Really like that one. We went 4-1 on our picks on Sunday, so feeling pretty good going into the Sweet 16. I think Florida Atlantic is a live dog against Tennessee. Now, admittedly, I thought Tennessee was going to lose to Louisiana. Louisiana got the cover. Thank you, Raging Cajuns, for that one. Ultimately, didn't get the win, and then they just took Duke completely out of it. They were the tougher team in that one. Florida Atlantic, though, that's a real team. We're going to be grabbing the points there. FanDuel also lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same game parlays. So don't miss your chance at a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/lockdown. Again, fanduel.com/lockdown to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel. They're an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Trent kind of back with you one final time here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. That's what we do on the network. Not just Hawkeyes, doesn't matter. I'm a Twins fan. I love what they're doing over there. Nash, he moved on to a new job, but already great work happening there. I'm a Bears fan. Got that covered. Your team every day, Locked On across the network. We got Locked On college basketball, Locked On NFL draft. So much going on, and we have you covered here on the network. So as we get back into the Hawkeyes and we get into the wrestling team, as the season comes to a close, a second place finish, which realistically was what was going to happen, right? It just Penn State, such a behemoth. We needed them to fall back a little bit. And though maybe they certainly did not wrestle a perfect tournament. You had a couple of guys upset, though they also had a couple of guys that made a run to the finals. We had to have Penn State have a struggle of a tournament. And the Hawkeyes had to wrestle perfectly, and that didn't happen. And we get into Spencer Lee and getting caught. Spencer Lee has been such a figure of this Iowa wrestling program for the last half decade. And what he has meant also to the program as a whole, helping deliver a national championship. Would have been another in 2020 if that ultimately was not canceled because of the pandemic. And what he meant. We talk about Caitlin Clark so much and what she means to the community and women's basketball fans and just basketball fans in general. And the new people that she's bringing in. And Spencer Lee, he was that kind of person as well. And we have these two iconic people going through our athletic department, our athletic programs here recently, and to see it end in that fashion. Now, Saturday morning, as I get the email from the University of Iowa, it was very odd to me the way that the press release was handled. Now, this very well could be reading way too much into something that doesn't need that much reading into, right? I mean, that's also a piece of this. But for a 2-sentence, 3-line press release to be sent out after somebody this iconic, somebody this important is put out there, it left a lot of people questioning what is going on here. Is this something that the coaching staff, the athletic department is disappointed in? Is there an injury lingering there? Now, the sounds of things that is not the case. That there's nothing that you have to worry about, that the ACL repairs that he has gone through, that something went wrong there. But you did see that he added the brace. He had that big wrap back on their leg again towards the end of the season. A lot of speculation about that. And that's what it leads to. But I was just surprised that in the press release, there wasn't more, that there wasn't a quote from him. There wasn't a quote from Coach Brands, that we didn't see kind of a list of the accomplishments that he had, because that's normally the way that these press releases are. Again, it's speculation. It was just an odd way to see it handled in that fashion. It was great to hear that he was there supporting his teammates as they were wrestling in the consolation round. Guys trying to come back for third. We got to see some good performances there on Saturday morning into the afternoon, and guys fighting their way up the podium after already becoming All-Americans and finishing in the top 8 and trying to work their way up. That was good to see that he was there, because again, that speculation was out there. What is going on? I know there's going to be more of the story and more that's certainly going to come out, but just a terrible end to an incredible season for Spencer Lee. Now, the motivation, obviously, for him is to become an Olympic wrestler and ultimately win Olympic gold. And people believe, and people that know wrestling a whole lot better than I do, they believe that he has the kind of talent that it's going to take. I mean, think of the great wrestlers that have gone through the Iowa wrestling room, great wrestlers in general that have gone through great collegiate careers and didn't get to that ultimate pinnacle of winning a gold medal in the Olympic round. It is an absolute grind. And the physical toll that has already gone through in the body that happens in wrestling. And for a guy like Spencer Lee, that has to keep the weight down. I mean, this is not like an off season or basketball. You can put the ball away for a couple of weeks and go do your thing, or football, and you're letting everything kind of regenerate itself, if you will. This is 365 days where you have to be at your absolute best and you have to be working on your body and the physical nature that it's going through and what he is going to be. That is something that we will be keeping an eye on. But just want to talk a little bit about him. We'll talk more about the future of Iowa wrestling here in the coming days and weeks, and we'll look forward to the program. It's going to be a weird one next year as well. I mean, you think about it. Obviously, 2024 will be another Olympic year. The people that'll be working to get to the Olympic team, we're going to see a bunch of wrestlers that are going to be out there and making the decision to not compete collegiately next season because of that. So, though Penn State is a loaded roster again, there a possibility some guys are not going to be a part of that program across the country. So, going to be just a different kind of year, one to keep an eye on. And Iowa is going to be involved. You'd have to anticipate again in the transfer portal. You know, they've done that recently. We saw Real Woods make it to the championship, ultimately didn't get there. Iowa's string, though, of having guys in the finals, that continued again this season. That was great to see. But over three overall from the state of Iowa, as we saw three wrestlers there, and all of them lose in the championship round. But overall, second place finish, it's a trophy. It's not the trophy that they want. Got to find a way to run down Penn State. They've taken it to another level. And finally, Iowa football. It'll be pro day. We will see some of the top end prospects not going to be doing much. You're not going to see Lucas Van Ness out there going through everything. But for that next tier guy, the guys that are trying to become free agents, maybe getting a shot at the next level, even a late round draft pick. I mean, this is going to be the time that they're going to have their best opportunity. The guys that were not invited to Indianapolis as well. This is their opportunity to shine. So there'll be some good stories that are going to talk about that. We will get into that. Spring football is beginning. We got a ton of football content coming your way here in the coming weeks. We got to talk about Iowa basketball. We will be continuing to preview the women's team as they make the run to the Sweet 16, and hopefully they'll continue on here for a couple of weeks. Iowa baseball, they get a sweep over the weekend as they get it done against South Dakota State. Had to play one of the games down by Kansas City, came back home, played a doubleheader, get three victories against the Jackrabbits, and now 15-3 on the season, a chance to be in really good shape before Big Ten play begins, and it begins with the big one as they'll get Maryland in the opening round. So that's coming up right around the corner. We got you covered here with a lot of Hawkeye talk, your team every day on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. And as always, thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen today. For your second listen, make sure you check out our new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Our experts, Isaac Shade and Annie Patton, bringing you everything you need to know on and off the floor. Plus, hear from the big name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Let's continue stories in Hawkeye lore, and we will talk to you then. More football talk around the corner and a whole lot more here on Locked On Hawkeyes. Go Hawks.